Back at it again at
Birdman's incredible interstellar amusement park.
This is horrible!
I grabbed a bite at the
bucket of sushi.
He's captured thousands of aliens.
Don't worry, we'll get them out.
You lying ass bitch.
I haven't seen Yacker for a while.
I have a generator to shut down. Yeah, that's right. I'm stretching. You got a problem with that?
Yes, damn it!
I want to be able to fully enjoy taking you apart without some pulled muscle slowing me down. Okay, now I'm ready. Of course, if you want to run away, please feel free. There's no shame in it. Well, maybe a little shame.
Shut up, bitch!
We did it, dude.
We? I don't remember you fighting off any insane robots.
Why are you the way that you are?
True. Well, good job to you on inventing a translator that allowed us to...
Got it.
Why?
He's powered by the energy from your little friend.
Oh my god! Wow!
Hey, Dad! Help! Help! How? 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 Stop right there! Stop! No!
No.
Yeah, I can't do this.
A certain someone got their voice back. I feel like my own self. All I want to do is talk. Hey, remember we were chasing those little alien guys? What's up with those things anyway? They share my bodies.
In conclusion,
What was the reason?
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I just explained the reason.
What was the reason, bitch?
Ladies and gentlemen, from the bottom of my heart, what in the toe jam tapioca did we just experience? I'm for real, what was that nuclear fallout irradiated bowel movement of a script? This might be the absolute worst thing that has ever happened to this franchise, and I do not think that's an exaggeration. But for those of you who still do, after all of this time of me proving over and over again how colossally it poisons every aspect of this series, let's run through it all one last time. This time with even more evidence and references. And I'll be covering everything that I alluded to or referenced in passing in full detail for this section. So if you think this is just gonna be all the stuff you already heard me say before, prepare to be surprised because I have been holding back in the previous parts. Oh yes, you heard me right. All of that was me holding back. But no longer. It's time to eviscerate this game completely and without mercy, starting with the setting of this entire story, which is, of course, the world building. The first scene of the game essentially shatters the entirety of the characters and world. Robotnik has built an elaborate interplanetary amusement park, and Sonic, Tails, and the entire world at large didn't notice until he was all done. Or they didn't care. This is the same guy who builds Death Stars on a regular basis, blew up half the moon, took over many an island, caused the flood of Central City, broke the planet itself into pieces on more than one occasion, among 1,000 other horrible things. And no one noticed that he was building planet-sized things without supervision or investigation. No government, no other characters, nobody other than these two incompetent buffoons give a crap about what's going on. And even they really don't care like they should. Sega couldn't even be bothered to invent some new characters, or heck, Just have a bunch of civilians react to this thing being built, or being held hostage while trying to enjoy the amusement park, which would make sense and be interesting for Sonic to have to work around. Not even a guy with a telescope casually noticing this towering catastrophe. It's just 100% hidden from the entire world until Robotnik's ready to reveal it. He's taken over 5 entire planets, and no one stopped him. No one kept an eye out or an ear out for what he was doing for months or years it took him to build this humongous thing. No one makes mention of Robotnik's habit of building space stations with death lasers on them, and therefore they need to hurry and find a way to dismantle whatever weapons he's got on this thing before he blows up the rest of the moon or starts pointing it at cities. Sonic says that the only thing they spend their time doing is stopping Robotnik from taking over the world, while on one of the many worlds Robotnik has taken over off screen. Astoundingly dumber than that is they have no urgency about investigating this thing. They don't fly up there in their own spaceship. They trust the elevator to the stars won't plummet them to their doom because everyone has forgot that Robotnik is behind all this. But let's not forget that he built this whole thing without any security cameras, alarm systems, sensors of any kind, and no way of knowing when someone arrives on the amusement park, despite him knowing that it will draw the attention of the entire world because it's an interplanetary conglomerate connected to the planet they live on. How could anyone not notice this before it came in a telescope's line of sight? Yet, he has no security systems, no early warning systems, nothing that tells him intruders are here. Or at the very least, intruders are in unauthorized places on the complex. Does he even have some sensors or systems in place telling him about the various hazards and dangers inherent to space travel? What if there's a cluster of asteroids headed for the mind control cannon, or the gravity generators, or the air tanks, or any other vitally important part of this entire operation? What's he gonna do, just die? Into the plan? Game over? How, when attaching different planets to this space station, did he not run into several problems in terms of astrophysics, such as gravitational fields, temperature changes on the various planets in relation to their proximity and orientation from the sun, causing unnatural continental drifts and movement of tectonic plates on the crust of the planets, stability of the cores of these planets, severe and drastic weather changes due to the absence or addition of moons, satellites, and other planetary bodies in relation to these planets, extreme chemical reactions happening to the ozones of these planets. I mean, did anyone stop and think about what moving a planet would actually entail and how much damage would be irrevocably dealt to these planets? Because it seems like no one did. Why don't you go ahead and look up what would happen if you moved a planet or even halted its orbit for a day and see what you can find? Because I managed to pull up these little golden nuggets with a casual YouTube search.
The moon also helps stabilize the Earth's tilt. Take away the moon and the Earth would go wobbling all over the place, and it would cause what I can only describe as climate change on steroids.
Such a sudden pull might cause chaos on the planet after its outer layer moves and sets off a series of devastating tsunamis and earthquakes.
With Venus in our night sky, we might never experience darkness. Venus is the brightest planet in our solar system. It would reflect 60% more light than the moon. And because it's 3.5 times the size of the moon, it would force the Earth into a binary system. Earth and Venus would rotate each other. Simulations of a binary system usually end up with planets colliding or merging.
Wow, look at the Kuiper belt. It's going crazy. Without Neptune's gravitational pull keeping things stable, orbits are crossing and celestial bodies are crashing into each other. Check it out. Pluto's orbit is misshapen now too. Neptune pretty much controls it as well.
Because Saturn is so large, the Earth would quickly become its moon. And if Earth orbited around Saturn, it simply wouldn't be the Earth as we know today. Because Jupiter is so massive, the side of the Earth that's closest to Jupiter would experience a stronger gravitational pull than the opposite side. This would distort the shape of the Earth. All this pulling apart would create frequent volcanic eruptions and violent earthquakes. Jupiter's gravitational pull would tear the Earth apart.
What would happen if the Earth stopped rotating for a second?
Oh, yeah, that would be disastrous. Disastrous. Because right now, here in New York, you can calculate at our latitude, we are all moving with the Earth at 800 miles an hour, due east, because Earth is rotating. If you stopped Earth and you weren't seat belt buckled to the Earth, you would fall over and roll 800 miles an hour due east. It would kill everyone on Earth. People would be flying out of windows, and that would just be a bad day on Earth. I'm just saying. Now, if somehow we all slowed down, so anything not bolted to the Earth would fly due east, 800 miles an hour. That's what happens to you in a car if you hit a brick wall and you're not wearing a seatbelt. You keep going. That's why you get hurt in those kinds of accidents.
Yeah, so this, not happening. For several dozen reasons. But I haven't even talked about the rotation of Earth/Mobius while the space elevator is connected to it, and while that is connected to the rest of the planets. The rotation of the Earth is about 1,000 miles per hour, or 460 meters per second for the non-Americans out there. This is obviously very fast, but we don't feel it because of the Earth's immense size, and gravity helps greatly to keep our orientation on the planet stable. Earth's gravity is far stronger compared to its centripetal acceleration, so that's what's necessary to counteract the effect of moving at such a speed. Meaning, if you leave Earth's gravity, you will be at the mercy of the 1,000 miles per hour or 460 meters per second rotation. So this space elevator should be moving extremely fast the higher you go up, which would make its perch at the surface of Mobius practically stationary. This would result in the stupidly designed and poorly thought out space elevator ripping apart. Thus, there would be no anchor for the interstellar amusement park. It would now just be 5 chained up planets resuming their orbits, only in very close proximity to Mobius, which would result in what again?
Oh, yeah, that would be disastrous. Disastrous. It would kill everyone on Earth. People would be flying out of windows, and that would just be a bad day on Earth. I'm just saying. No.
Yeah, no. Oh, hey, speaking of space things, how about that black hole that Sonic casually ran away from then proceeded to fall into? That was a wild ride of bullcrap, wasn't it? You may be expecting me to show clips of how black holes actually work and how inaccurate this magical purple nurple one is to the real deal, and I will. In fact, the footage I've been showing is how zero gravity portrays a black hole, which still isn't accurate, but somehow is leagues better than this game's portrayal of a black hole. But quite frankly, I'm stuck on Wisp Juice powered mind control cannon making a black hole in the first place. That's just... how? Did the writers forget that Purple Frenzy isn't a gravitational power? Purple Frenzy just lets you consume stuff and grow, that's it. If this energy was divorced from the Nega Wisp, then why wouldn't it work like all the other energy in this series? When chaos energy is built up and isn't channeled, it just explodes normally, something akin to Chaos Blast, for instance. When life energy is built up, it doesn't explode per se, it dissipates, according to Lost World's ending. When ring energy is built up, it never explodes, but when someone has a lot of rings on them, they all burst out of them. However, this could just be their inventory of rings bursting open, not the ring energy itself exploding. So why does this Nega Wisp energy create a black hole? Especially when it's used for a freaking mind control cannon. Do the writers understand the difference between mind control and black holes?
A black hole is a region in space where the force of gravity is so strong, not even light, the fastest known entity in our universe, can escape.
When a massive star dies, it leaves a smaller, remnant core behind. Gravity overwhelms all other forces and turns the core into a black hole. But don't let its name fool you. A black hole isn't a hole at all, but rather a huge amount of matter packed into a very small space.
Black hole is a region of space where matter has condensed to such a high density that the gravity at its surface, the surface gravity, is so high that you cannot escape it, even at the speed of light. You are forever trapped. It is the fabric of the space-time continuum warped back on itself. And once you fall in, you are never coming out. It is the human version of the Roach Motel. You check in, but you don't check out.
In 1916, using Einstein's general theory of relativity, a German physicist named Karl Schwarzschild calculated that any mass could become a black hole if it were compressed tightly enough. But it wasn't until 1971 when theory became reality. Astronomers studying the constellation Cygnus discovered the first black hole.
A black hole's gravity is so strong that even light can't get out. That's why you'll never see one. But you can detect it from the gamma ray bursts that the hole emits. These bursts, discovered by Stephen Hawking, now carry his name, Hawking radiation.
What does any of that have to do with controlling minds? Please point to where mind control factored in. I'm dying to know. And speaking of that ingenious, perfectly logical, and not at all brain-dead reason for this entire story, this whole mind control ray plot is far from new in this series, and it's been done infinitely better in every other installment. In Sonic Jump 2007, Robotnik's big plan was to steal the Chaos Emeralds to power his brainwash beam, which was located on his space station so he could blast the planet and take over the world. Sounds eerily familiar to this game, doesn't it? Just without all the stupid. He only required the Chaos Emeralds to power his machine, and it is heavily implied that he'd be able to mind control everyone on the planet forever with just the 7 Chaos Emeralds powering the device. Simple, makes sense, uses previously established power source that is proven to be highly effective. We're all good. Sonic Runners features the same exact mind control ray from this game, the only difference being the power source, which again was the Chaos Emeralds, not Wisp Juice. And shockingly enough, Robotnik almost nailed Sonic with it. The only reason Sonic was saved was because of the Chaos Emeralds. See, Robotnik drained them of all their power to use his mind control ray, so Sonic held onto the drained Chaos Emeralds in the hopes of breaking the machine and restoring them. However, when Robotnik shot Sonic with the mind control ray, the emeralds he was carrying reabsorbed their power that the mind control ray was using, thus restoring them to normal. Then Sonic went super and saved the day. Again, simple, makes sense, uses previously established power source, even portrays Robotnik as competent and intelligent by using the device on Sonic. We're all good. Sonic Runner's Adventure has the mind control ray return once again, this time powered by not Chaos Emeralds and not Wisp Farts. No. Robotnik learned his lesson from the previous failures and decided to use multiple energy sources for his device. Yes, Robotnik was allowed to be intelligent and outmaneuvered the heroes by letting them think a few different things and forcing them to investigate to figure out his next move, instead of just handing them all the information they need on a silver platter. Imagine that. First, he uses the extractor from Lost World. Then, when he runs to the next power source he's using, he fires the mind control ray at Sonic, enabling him to escape and continue working to bring the mind control ray to full power. The next energy source he uses is not even one the heroes are aware of, but makes sense when you start thinking about it. That power source being the latent energies in Sky Sanctuary. Thinking about it, Sky Sanctuary has always been a bit of a mystery in terms of functionality. There are a lot of gimmicks and interesting design choices that were never fully explained. So Robotnik discovering a mysterious latent energy in this place actually makes sense, and it's something no one would think of as his target, which makes Robotnik incredibly intelligent in this story. Then, in the climax, it's revealed that Robotnik secretly used the mind control ray on Tails at the beginning of the story, even while the extractor was gathering more energy for fuel. This secured his escape earlier in the game and kept him one step ahead of the heroes for the entire story. And finally, they pieced it all together that his goal was to use multiple energy sources, and Sky Sanctuary's latent energies is the last of those energy sources. Of course, in the nick of time, the heroes thwart him in the end, but he's portrayed as perfectly competent and threatening throughout these scenes. And once again, it makes sense. Uses previously established power sources, reveals a new power source that is actually a logical progression of the lore. It's a little more complex than the other examples and portrays Robotnik as highly intelligent, extremely competent, and even threatening. We're more than good on this one. We just went through the same exact mind control ray plot 3 times, all of which are portrayed in a vastly better light than Color's shameful display. And to add insult to injury, 2 of those examples use the exact same mind control ray as Color's does, and they still make more sense. So comparing Wisp Juice to Chaos Energy, Life Energy, and the latent energies of Sky Sanctuary, we can determine that Yeah, choosing to milk wisps is far less suitable for fuel. So this entire plot is freaking abysmal in the highest degree. And not a single person in this volcanic train wreck makes mention of the inefficient fuel source that is the wisp juice. We've seen time and time again that there are far more effective and far easier to obtain sources of power that Robotnik is already used to using and knows the properties of them very well. Life energy has been a fundamental element in the foundation of this series since day one. There's never been a single problem using the inherent energy of living organisms to power his various machinery and devices. He certainly has no ethical qualms about this energy source, and there is a supreme abundance of life on Mobius/Earth, so much that in previous games he could get away with using plants for a source of energy, and it works just as well as sentient creatures. Lost World confirms that the plant life doesn't have to come from Little Planet in order to produce pure life energy, and even if it didn't, there was nothing inherently special about Little Planet's plant life that would suggest that Earth/Mobius's plant life couldn't be used as fuel in the exact same way. The Chaos Emeralds were, and always will be, the primary MacGuffin of the series. They're in nearly every game, they're tied to the world building in such an intimate and intrinsic way that leaving them out of a game is incredibly suspicious. Robotnik is very familiar with using the Chaos Emeralds for a broad variety of purposes and plots, from time manipulation to planet devastation to ancient civilization excavation to dimensional destabilization. He's done it all. These emeralds are like the Swiss Army knife of evil plans. They can do literally anything given the right equipment is attached to them. The Chaos Emeralds always scatter after use, and no one person is ever the keeper of all 7, which explains why Robotnik is able to get them, or attempt to get them, in every game they're featured in. But if that's too difficult this time, or will attract too much attention, which is hilarious to think about when we've gotten to this point, but okay, let's say Robotnik wants to keep as low a profile as he can with this whole thing, and getting all the emeralds is just not feasible. Fine. It has been proven time and time again that a single emerald has incredible power that is easy to harness. Sonic Chaos is all about a single emerald being used to sink the entirety of South Island. Unleashed features each emerald single-handedly pulling a continental chunk of the planet back in place by placing it in a Gaia temple. And 06 shows the reverse. A single emerald is capable of destabilizing the entire crust of the planet, while 2 can open a tear in the space-time continuum anywhere in time and space the user chooses. Even a single shard of a broken Chaos Emerald can produce incredible effects, as stated in Sonic Blast. With just the emerald shards, Robotnik could fortify his Silver Castle base. But most famously, in Sonic Battle, the emerald shards are the only source of energy for Robotnik's entire army of Phi units. These Phi units were copies of Emerald, the most powerful robot in the entire series, and used to combat him and the rest of the heroes. They gave them all a hard time throughout the entire game, but the main source of grief for the heroes in that game was Chaos Gamma, the reincarnation of E102 Gamma from Adventure. He was so powerful, with just an emerald shard, he was able to tire out Amy, Knuckles, Rouge, and Tails when they faced him in combat. He was so powerful, he nearly destroyed Emerald in seconds and gave both Emerald and Cream a very tough fight. His moves were some of the most powerful in the entire game, and his healing ability, Recovery Mode, was the second most effective of all the other players, second only to Ultimate Emerald's healing ability, wherein he has all 7 Chaos Emeralds to aid his recovery. And once again, we have the exact mind control weapon plot using Chaos Emeralds to power the device and working perfectly. Over and over again, it's made abundantly clear that even a piece of a single Chaos Emerald would make for a greater power source than all of the wisps in existence, just from ease of implementation alone. But if the developers just really had a massive bug up their butt about including the Chaos Emeralds, that's fine too. Rings are one of the most common, easily accessible, non-conflict sources of energy in this universe. Robotnik has previously used rings to build another amusement park of sprawling size in Shadow's game, Circus Park. I do not know how he did this. I do not know why he did this. I do not know how long it took him to do this. But Robotnik freaking did it. He stole the world's rings and created this massive theme park with apparently thousands and thousands of rings left over, which proves that he can use them for construction if nothing else. But they're also used in Advance 3 to power every single badnik in that game, which means Robotnik can also use them like a battery, similar to Chaos Emeralds and living organisms. Rings are even more famous than the Chaos Emeralds and are known for sustaining superforms with their energy, meaning they work perfectly in tandem with Chaos energy. This is further proved when looking at Rivals 2, where an emerald detector is powered by rings, further implying a connection between the two energies. And in Unleashed, the boost gauge, the main feature of the daytime stages of the game, is also called the ring energy gauge in the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 version of the game, also known as the best version of that game. And rings have the added bonus of being the easiest material to store, seeing as they can be collected by simply touching them and they disappear from sight but remain in that person's inventory. I have my own theories about how this works mechanically, but that's an entirely different video in and of itself. But the point is this: Robotnik can easily take as many rings as he wants in a very short amount of time and effortlessly store them in an invisible inventory, meaning there would be no way of knowing how many Robotnik has. No one will come looking for the rings he's taken unless he's seen taking them. But even then, they appear to be more or less a free-for-all kind of deal in this series. It's unclear why Tails was concerned with Robotnik having so many rings at once, nor why he calls them the world's rings, unless Robotnik robbed several countries off-screen during a planet-wide alien invasion, but Tails was the only one who cared enough to try and get the rings back, which implies that not a lot of people are too concerned about the amount of rings in the world, and at the very least, if you don't take rings that belong to someone else, you're good. But take that with a grain of salt, considering the source.
Where's that?
And because rings pair so well with Chaos energy, Robotnik could very likely just grab a few emerald shards, not even a full emerald, then take a quick trip to several uninhabited regions on Earth/Mobius, gather all the rings there, then bring them back to base and use them with the emerald shards to discreetly and efficiently power the mind control cannon. That's probably the most intelligent way of doing this without drawing any attention to himself and without going through so much effort for so little reward. Plus, it could also be the first time that the connection of ring energy and chaos energy are explained by the characters to definitively iron out that bit of world building. Or, if you want to take out all things supernatural and exclusive to this series in terms of energy types and forces, then might I deposit these very simple, very obvious suggestions? A regular generator, nuclear reactor, hydroelectric energy, wind turbines, solar panels. I mean, you are in space after all. Gasoline and or rocket fuel, batteries. Hell, you could hook up several thousand treadmills or hamster wheels all across one of the planetary structures you've built and make your badniks run all day long to produce the energy you need manually. As mundane or even silly as any of these options may sound to you, guess what? It's infinitely more efficient, infinitely more intelligent, infinitely more careful, and infinitely easier to accomplish than wisp hunting. Their energy source is laughably stupid. It doesn't connect to mind control even tangentially, and acquiring the energy is much more strenuous and difficult, not to mention the amount of fuel necessary for achieving the desired effect for a significant amount of time is, well, I guess it's finally time to uncork this perfectly aged bottle of bewilderment. Robotnik's plan to mind control the universe is completely unfeasible in every sense of the word. Looking at the amount of aliens stored in each futuristic Tupperware Easter egg, the amount of fuel he was able to get out of potentially more than 25 containers of hyperactive alien juice, and the time it took to run out of said fuel, it doesn't look good at all. It's not explicit how many wisps it takes to get this much hyperpigmentation juice, but regardless, it runs out far faster than Robotnik was expecting it to. And the amount he had was 2 containers, approximately clocking in at twice the size of your standard 55-gallon drums. All these measurements are based on the 2 containers attached to his Eggmobile and how they relate to his height. Robotnik is confirmed to be 6'1". The standard 55-gallon drums are 3 feet exactly, which is almost exactly half his size, and these containers are clearly more than half his size. While sitting, Robotnik appears to be at half his size, approximately, which means he's 3 feet in this screenshot. While sitting, the containers are approximately double his size, meaning they are extremely close to 6 feet tall. They appear to be the same circumference of the standard 55-gallon drums, which means they would be exactly double the amount of gallons as the drums. 55 doubled is 110, which equals 1 container. So double that for the second container and you get 220 gallons worth of volume in total. Now follow me here for a second. I promise we're going somewhere. A 55-gallon drum, in terms of gasoline, can power a mid-sized 2010 car for about 700 miles according to the average miles per gallon fuel economy of that year. 55 gallons of gasoline can also power a standard 5 kilowatt generator for 42 hours straight. Meaning, 55 gallons of gasoline is a lot of fuel that will last a good while. So take into account that Robotnik has quadruple that amount of fuel, 220 gallons, which would be 4,950 miles for a mid-sized 2010 car and 165 hours for a 5 kilowatt generator. And the amount of time he could mind control tails with 220 gallons of wisp juice is 58 seconds. Do you understand how astronomically inefficient that is? And that's just comparing it to basic-ass gasoline. We haven't gone into chaos energy, life energy, ring energy, none of that. This is just straight up gasoline. I don't care how many wisps it took to get approximately 220 gallons of hypersensitivity juice, but if you only get 58 seconds of use out of 220 gallons of anything, that is not a viable fuel source. Logistically, this blooming swamp onion of a plan doesn't make a lick of sense, period. But it gets even worse. Being as generous as I can, each of his Easter egg containers have about 50 wisps in them, seeing as the combined amount of wisps here is about 100 and there's 2 containers. Alright, then take into account that he counted at least 25 containers. So with 50 wisps in each, that's 1,250 wisps. And he said that's not nearly enough. So let's assume that he meant it wasn't enough to control Mobius/Earth, but it's enough for the test run he does later. So again, let's be generous and assume that he took about half of those wisps to get 220 gallons he uses in that scene. Which would mean it takes 625 wisps to get 220 gallons of Hyper GoPro gas. 625 wisps buys you 58 seconds of mind control, meaning you would need about 919,296 wisps to yield 328,320 gallons of wisp juice to even hope to reach 24 hours of mind control. If my assumed measurements are accurate, I could be off by a bit here. But my point is, you've got an insane amount of every integer in this process to be able to achieve 24 hours of mind control. And the kicker is, he didn't even see if he could mind control more than one person at once, and what that would do to his fuel consumption rate. Because it could have very well cut those 58 seconds in half with each person added to the equation, meaning we'll have to divide our total by every living being on the planet, equaling a fraction of a second so small that it would be over as soon as the brain registers it's begun. Thus, your fuel would need to increase astronomically. And again, that's for a single planet. Robotnik had his sights set on the entire universe, which makes the fuel requirements beyond comprehension, and that microscopic fraction of time disappear into laughably impossible absurdity. So even if Sonic and Tails didn't attempt to foil his plan, even if no one opposed him at all, and everything was successful with squeezing every drop of energy from all the wisps, Robotnik would still lose. He would gain absolutely nothing after expending all of this time, his effort, and his resources. It would amount to a galactic level of failure and imbecility, a complete and utter waste, the likes of which the works of fiction have never reached nor ever should, making this a perfect encapsulation of this very story. The narrative snaps in half again. Only this time, it can't recover from snapping in half. It's permanently dead and buried. So let's do a comprehensive autopsy on this watermelon zombification of the concept of a story. For as dead set as Sega was in making this story as simple as possible to avoid issues that continuously plague modern Sonic stories, they somehow managed to fumble at every turn. Sure, it's a simple story, but it just might have more problems than the most complex stories in the series. Problems ranging from strains of logic and minor issues that should have been caught on the second or third draft. Issues I'll eloquently refer to as shouldn't happens, as in things that can happen, but in all likelihood shouldn't happen. This is where little coincidences and small accidents, metatextual or otherwise, can happen, but very well shouldn't happen in the story because it strains the suspension of disbelief and the concept of cause and effect when it doesn't need to. It's also where I'll put some admittedly small but valid errors that don't impact the story as much as other criticisms. Shouldn't happens include introducing the wisps as a core gameplay mechanic for 2 levels with no explanation, then pretending that the laser wisp was the first instance of a wisp bestowing sonic power and providing the explanation there instead. Also, having wisp containers in the open on all of the planets instead of hiding them underground or behind a vault or something like that to make it more difficult for Sonic to free them or find out what Robotnik's up to. Having 2 opening scenes played in between each other, relegating the better opening scene to a flashback for no discernible reason. Tails' translator doesn't work despite his incredible intelligence and mechanical know-how and doesn't become fully functional until his very last scene, which makes understanding Yacker take longer than it would have if he got it right earlier, meaning certain scenes would be faster, less time would be wasted on Sonic and Tails' end, and this could change the story in small but significant ways. If Sonic got through the zones faster, he could have stopped Robotnik from accumulating as much Nega Wisp juice for the final boss, making that fight easier, which leads to a less devastating black hole explosion. If he moved even faster though, he could free the Wisp planets before the mind control cannon is fully charged, therefore rendering the thing useless, negating the black hole from ever forming. He'd still have to fight the final boss, but it wouldn't be a race against a black hole while fighting Robotnik. Robotnik unintentionally reveals his plan to Sonic because he randomly decides to do an evil monologue out in the open. Sonic lets Orbot and Cubot waste more time instead of ignoring them and trying to capture Robotnik right then and there. Not saying it would have worked, but if the attempt was made, the timetable would change. Tails' translator is in binary code instead of a regular language anyone can read. It's never explained why it has to be that way, and if it was just English, then he'd probably be able to read it better, which would make those scenes faster and would change the timetable. Robotnik just has a map of the entire complex, which Sonic and Tails use to traverse through the levels. Without that map, they would be fumbling around, spinning their wheels trying to get a lay of the land, which would change the timetable drastically. If Tails and Sonic split up and both use the Wisp's powers to free the Wisps and find the generators, the timetable drastically changes. Sonic and Tails should have heard, noticed, or dodged the mind control ray, which would speed that scene up. Robotnik once again reveals his plans instead of keeping it to himself, which would help him just a bit when trying to buy time for his mind control cannon to fully charge. If Tails used his brain for something other than the translator, he would have been able to deduce where the mind control cannon is located and bring it to Sonic's attention to help him sabotage it. Though it's already sabotaged, Tails could have brought it to Sonic's attention and that would change the events that take place. Because instead of rushing to save the Wisps in time, they would be focused on destroying the reason why Robotnik wants the Wisps in the first place. And that's a different story right there. Cubot's voice chip consistently doesn't work, causing a lot of distractions for Robotnik despite Robotnik having ample free time to fix it once and for all himself. Robotnik doesn't have some sort of command or override code or a literal mute button to shut off Cubot's voice, but he relegates this annoyance to Orbot, someone he admits is an idiot and useless, and expects it to be resolved, but it obviously isn't. Not to mention the obvious solution, removing the voice chip and rendering Cubot mute but fully functional otherwise, isn't even considered. All the time spent on Cubot's antics would then be focused on the task at hand, which Robotnik could use to check and double check that everything is running as it should. Or at the very least, he'd be able to focus on beefing up his final boss mech or plan some other contingency in case something goes wrong, which would change the story a bit. Also, Orbot smacking Cubot on the back fixes his voice chip completely despite a wrench to the head, Sonic jumping on him, and putting the boss robot pieces into the trash bin don't affect him in the slightest. Very strange and illogical, but still a minor problem, so moving on. If Sonic didn't waste time bragging and taunting non-sentient objects and making declarations that fall on deaf ears, he would have completed his task far sooner, and that would also ruin the timetable. But Sonic decides to tell extremely long jokes and even stop and listen to the random, completely unimportant PA announcements, which gives Robotnik just enough time to fully fuel the mind control cannon and cause the black hole to be as big and devastating as possible. The Wisps, despite begging and pleading all game long that they need to be freed so they can return to their home planets, fail to immediately send their planets back to their part of the universe after Sonic frees them of the tractor beam chains. If they did that, there would be a lot less of them to get sucked up by Robotnik's final boss mech, and the fight would be easier and shorter. Robotnik chooses not to sneak attack Sonic and Tails as they rush to get to the space elevator, despite his willingness to do so earlier in the story, enabling Sonic and Tails to prepare for him and Tails to get away using the space elevator. The space elevator isn't sabotaged to keep them from leaving that way, something Robotnik should be able to do extremely easily before they get there. There isn't an army of badniks at the space elevator waiting for Sonic and Tails to show up. The PA system is still working despite this level of destruction. Sonic doesn't have to dodge debris as it's being pulled into the black hole. Sonic is floating inside of a black hole for several seconds, and time doesn't distort or shift while he's in there, even though that's categorically what happens when one gets close to a black hole, let alone floats inside it for several long moments.
The experience of time is different around black holes. From the outside, you seem to slow down as you approach the event horizon, so time passes slower for you. At some point, you would appear to freeze in time, slowly turn red, and disappear. While from your perspective, you can watch the rest of the universe in fast forward, kind of like seeing into the future.
This isn't binary code, it's hexadecimal, which contradicts Tails' assertion that it was binary code earlier. Since Orbot is singing a spoof of Dim Bones by James Weldon Johnson, does that mean this story takes place in the human world or the anthro world? Yeah, I'm aware of Tails Tube's retcon of the two worlds concept, but it isn't necessarily a retcon. Merely points out that one of the two worlds is co-inhabited by humans and anthros, a fact we already knew about the two worlds concept anyway. Video for another time. So again, I ask, is this the human and anthro world, or is it the anthro-only world? Because if it's the latter, which they desperately want you to believe, then I have to ask how Dim Bones exists in this universe, and if James Weldon Johnson has an anthro counterpart on this world. And these wisps weren't featured in the rest of the game for what reason again? They just appear at the last half, never contributing until the very end of the story, unlike all the other wisps who were tirelessly helping Sonic at every turn. Bit of a dick move. Don't know what they were thinking with that, but alright. Moving on to the bigger issues, problems that cripple logic and reasoning, calling cause and effect into question. Errors that would have been caught as early as the first draft of the script, things that I will be calling wouldn't happens, as in, based on the information given to us in the story, the series as a whole, and what we know intrinsically about cause and effect, internal consistency and logic, these are the things that just wouldn't happen. happen. Not that they can never ever happen, but the chances of them happening are slim to none, especially with the context given from the rest of the series preceding this installment. These are much more significant problems than the shouldn't happens, to the point that they're the things one couldn't ignore when talking about the quality of the story. Wouldn't happens include the coincidence that aliens and the Wonder Twins were running around in the first level of the game at the same time that Sonic and Tails were loafing around, in earshot of them, and with no excuse or explanation for their actions to attempt to keep up the front.
I know you fucking lied.
Speaking of, Robotnik's front concerning the entire interplanetary theme park is all over the place and embarrassing. He pretends it's for making amends to the world for his repeated acts of terrorism, but it isn't advertised as such before this point that we know of, and there is no one else on the space colony for him to even attempt to back up this claim. And as soon as the first scene ends, that front is immediately torn down and Robotnik doesn't even attempt to recover it, nor explain away Orbot and Cubot's actions. If he did anything to back up his lie, the story would be very different and the world building would be affected as well. But he simply doesn't care after the very first scene of him pretending the amusement park is legitimate. Okay. He also doesn't have contingencies in place for when Sonic and Tails attempt to foil his plan. No, these do not count. They are amusement rides first and boss battles second. And they suck as bosses, by the way, really ineffectual and underwhelming, which could give him a significant amount of time to complete the plan or even help him mind control Sonic and Tails. Anything to slow them down would benefit his timetable and enable him to prepare the mind control cannon before Sonic and Tails stop him. Orbot and Cubot, robots specifically designed for data analysis and cleaning, are sent to round up the remaining wisps on Tropical Resort, instead of the badniks that are far more suited for combat and capture missions. Orbot and Cubot are chosen for this vitally important job, characters that Robotnik calls idiots and useless multiple times. Okay. But we're also shown they are lazy and incompetent with the simple tasks they're given. If a badnik suited for the job was deployed, such as Metal Sonic or even a brand new badnik with a high power vacuum, then the Wisps wouldn't have been running around after Sonic got through with 2 entire zones, which means he doesn't encounter Yacker, doesn't have concrete proof of Robotnik's evil plan, and now we're experiencing a very different game. The Wisps can understand English, but they can't speak it for some reason. They know what specific Earth/Mobius things are, such as underwear, soda, salad, noses, hair, nose hair, aquatic mammals, dolphins, and porpoises. But none of these are present on any of their planets. Aquarium Park does have marine life of varying sizes and types, but no mammals, which means no porpoises and no dolphins. So Yacker shouldn't know what these things are, but it appears as if he does, which isn't possible. If he indeed does know English and various aspects of Earth/Mobius stuff, then he can communicate with them without the translator, via charades or drawing, which obviously obliterates Tails' purpose in this story, which is just wonderful. The mind control ray's effects magically run out just before Tails is forced to fight Sonic, which is a cheap tease at best and a ridiculous contrivance at worst. Sonic doesn't boost past Tails to get to Robotnik for some reason. He just plays around here when he can literally, something Tails can't do as far as we know. When Tails is released from the mind control ray, Sonic doesn't even try to fight or capture Robotnik, which would have been awesome and also would have salvaged his character quite a bit and get more drama and intrigue going on. But nope, he just stands there while Robotnik goes on and on and on. Yacker has to tell Sonic and Tails about the tractor beam chains and generators instead of them putting 2 and 2 together. They saw a map of the entire interplanetary construction. They would have seen the very obvious glowing chains connecting each planet to the tropical resort in the middle. Tails blatantly says that
Yacker says the aliens don't have much time.
And both he and Jake are complacent about freeing the Wisp planets and saving the Wisps, which directly results in the mind control cannon reaching full power. Robotnik sits around doing nothing until the penultimate level of the game. Sonic and Tails repeat the premise of the entire story several times like they forgot they already covered that information and go through it again. Are they going senile? Sonic calls into question Tails' usefulness immediately after claiming he couldn't have done any of this without him. Tails poorly defends himself by blatantly lying about his importance to the story, and Sonic believes him because the writers were desperately trying to trick the audience into thinking Tails is relevant. He isn't. If even one Wisp told Sonic and Tails about the mind control cannon after the chains dissipated, then Sonic and Tails would have immediately tried to figure out where it was and how to stop it. Heck, if Sonic and Tails weren't complete idiots and remembered Robotnik revealing his plan to mind control the whole universe, they would have figured out it has to be a giant version of the mind control ray to enslave the entire world. Then they would have made moves to stop that plan, like finding it and making a serious attempt to sabotage it, despite it already being sabotaged. But of course, they didn't know that, so it's irrelevant in this context. If Sonic and Tails immediately attempted to go home after the final tractor beam chain dissipated, then they would be on the space elevator before Robotnik activated the mind control cannon and it blew up into a black hole, meaning they would be stuck inside the elevator while the black hole consumed everything. The Wisps would still defuse it, but the final boss wouldn't happen there. It would happen while or after the Wisps defuse the black hole, possibly even after they take all their planets and go home, which means Sonic would have to beat that final boss without Wisp power or Chaos Emeralds. He probably could, but it would be a very different story at that point. But then we come to the massive, glaring, mind-bending problems. The incredibly impossible pieces of writing that single-handedly can disintegrate the entire narrative at worst and annihilate a story act into an unrecognizable mess of ridiculous nonsense at best. These are the couldn't happens. The horrendous, torturous bullcrap that simply cannot happen in any way, shape, or form. Extremely glaring problems that are basically lit in neon, screaming they shall not be ignored. These abominations obliterate logic, reasoning, cause and effect, and internal consistency. These are the ones that weigh down every single aspect of the story into an ocean of lava. These couldn't happens are... Here we go. Every single part of the space elevator doesn't work. Sonic and Tails trusting it to safely take them all the way up to the space contraption. Robotnik building it to work with physical keys instead of bioscanners, passwords, or any other sci-fi thing. There is no system or indicator that alerts Robotnik that the space elevator is in use and who is using it. The speed at which it brings them to the amusement park is just in time for Sonic and Tails to witness Orbot and Cubot chasing Wisps, which kicks off the rest of the story. Robotnik builds the damn thing before he secured all the Wisps on Tropical Resort, enabling the entire story to happen. If Robotnik blew up the space elevator, Sonic and Tails would be dead or seriously injured and inconvenienced by floating through the vacuum of space, and the entire story ends there. If Robotnik has any security measures or systems in place, then he can immediately trap Sonic and Tails in space to do with them as he wishes, which ends the story. If someone didn't leave the keys in the space elevator, Sonic and Tails would have to find another way to reach the space station, which means they can't arrive when they originally do, and the story completely changes. If Sonic and Tails didn't take the space elevator, they would need to get their own spaceship and fly up there themselves. This is what should have happened in the first place, considering the many different spacecrafts they have at their disposal. This would also give them a massive advantage when attempting to stop Robotnik. Namely, they would be able to travel to any part of the different planets instantly and destroy the bosses and generators without having to run through the levels on foot. This breaks everything, in case you were wondering. Look, the space elevator's very existence snaps the narrative in half and deals irreparable damage to every single character in the story. And baby, That's just one of the couldn't happens. The rest are almost as detrimental to the script. For instance, there are absolutely no security systems or troubleshoot procedures on any part of this entire sci-fi monstrosity. No cameras, no sensors of any kind, no scanners of any kind, no alarms, no passwords, no passcodes, no locks of any kind, no vault doors, no reinforced structures, no safeguards, nothing. The only thing he put in are the standard pitfalls and gimmicks in all Sonic games, none of which are present in the actual script. If Robotnik had cameras, simple freaking cameras, he would have eyes on Sonic and Tails at all times, and they would never be able to catch their breath because he'd be sending wave after wave of enemies at them until his mind control ray is ready to be tested. And after running around without a break, they would be easy to mind control, and of course, 58 seconds is enough to get them to kill themselves or seriously injure and incapacitate themselves, which ends the story right there. And that's just cameras. Imagine if he had sensors, scanners, alarms, digital locks on reinforced structures, vaults housing the very important WISP containers, requiring passwords or passcodes to open them, any safeguards or sci-fi death traps keeping Sonic and Tails at bay in every way he can imagine. Then the entire story breaks because they're far too stupid and complacent to work through these countermeasures. But again, I wouldn't want to jump the gun just yet. If Robotnik didn't have systems already in place to take people to the other Wisp planets, or if he put some of those nifty safeguards and security measures on them to keep Sonic and Tails from accessing them, the story would end after the first level. Because these idiots don't have any way to travel between planets, they took the space elevator, which is connected to one isolated part of the interplanetary complex. Without the transports Robotnik built to take park-goers from one attraction to the next, they're stranded on tropical resort with nothing but the vacuum of space to greet them as soon as they attempt to get out. The arm puncture scene is the most overwhelmingly contrived piece of nonsense in this game. Now, I know it's got some stiff competition, but I really think this one takes the cake when it comes to contrivance specifically. The way in which the Ferris Wheel of Doom blew up, the fact that its arm is still intact enough to do the damage it does, the mind control cannon's location in proximity to the boss arena, the fact that the arm hits anything, the fact that the mind control cannon isn't safely hidden inside of Tropical Resort or placed on any other planet or satellite, the unbelievable fragility of the mind control cannon, the fact that Orbot and Cubot are the ones in charge of cleaning up the boss parts and decide to just not do their jobs they are literally created to do. If Orbot and Cubot function as they should, the story completely changes. The arm puncture would be notified and brought to Robotnik's attention immediately. If Robotnik checked Orbot and Cubot's progress in cleaning up the first boss fight, he would yell at them to get back to work and find every single piece. They would eventually find the arm puncture and the entire story completely changes. If Robotnik put any of his other badniks on the job instead of Orbot and Cubot, the arm puncture would be found and the story would completely change. If the arm of the Ferris Wheel of Doom didn't hit the mind control cannon, then Robotnik would activate it and all of Mobius/Earth would be under his control and the entire story completely changes. If Robotnik made a backup mind control cannon, the story would completely change. If the mind control cannon was even remotely as durable as it should be, the story would completely change. If the mind control cannon was in any other spot, literally meters to the north, south, east, or west of its current position, the story would completely change. If the Ferris Wheel of Doom blew up in any other way, the story would completely change. If Orbot or Cubot at any point in the story told Robotnik they couldn't find the arm of the Ferris Wheel of Doom, Robotnik would charge them to go back and don't rest until they find it. They would find it lodged into the mind control cannon, bring it to Robotnik's attention, and he would fix the problem. It doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. That's not how explosions work. That's not how planetary body-sized metal constructs work. That's not how technology interfaced with a damn hologram works. There is no way on God's green earth that this scene can happen. Despite the Wisp's immense power that can unravel a black hole and relocate entire planets in the blink of an eye, they can't seem to overcome two of the weakest characters in the entire series, chasing them with a pea shooter and a butterfly net. Yeah, Robotnik's mind control ray powered by 220 gallons of wisp juice only lasts 58 seconds, when that amount of basic gasoline or jet fuel can do much more. Despite being a super genius when facing this reality, he continues to believe that wisp juice is the only viable energy source as opposed to all the other energies in this series that he's more familiar with, are easier to obtain, and are leagues more efficient. The mind control ray scene is just teeming with stupidity. They don't hear Robotnik monologuing or his loud Eggmobile get into position to shoot them, yet Sonic can hear the humming of the mind control ray on the Eggmobile, which was at the same volume or even quieter than Robotnik talking and the Eggmobile's movements. Tails doesn't speak up as soon as he sees Robotnik, despite his speed being in the same league as Sonic's.
You've got brains like Eggman, speed like me, and can fly with your butt.
He only says something after the mind control ray is shot at them. Sonic is unbelievably inept in the entire scene and looks everywhere except where he obviously would look, especially after hearing the mind control ray zap towards him. Tails pushing Sonic out of the way instead of tackling him or pulling him is so blatantly obvious of the writers that if you squint hard enough, you just might see some of the puppet strings on Tails in this scene. Also, it's really lucky that Robotnik decided to use a mind control ray on them instead of a standard rocket launcher, laser cannon, or even a straight up machine gun. Because if any of those were at his disposal, which they are, then Tails would have been seriously injured, which would make it much easier to use the mind control ray on them. But because Tails has no real weight on the story anyway, it's not a massive narrative breaking problem. Which is a massive narrative breaking problem in and of itself. But again, I wouldn't want to jump the gun. Yacker is just magically not present, despite him being in every single scene with Tails since he was rescued by Sonic, almost as if including him would change the entire scene's outcome because he would have helped save Tails or defeat Robotnik. If Robotnik had a stealthier Eggmobile like in previous iterations, and if he didn't speak at all and just shot at them immediately, Sonic and Tails would be hit by the mind control ray, and from there he could make them kill each other, thus ending the story right there. If Tails and Sonic were half as competent as they normally are, they would hear Robotnik's nonsense, dodge the mind control ray, and engage Robotnik in combat. They would then capture him because the idiot doesn't have any defenses or weaponry on the Eggmobile in this game, which is yet another massive break in logic. Anyway, this would halt his plans immediately, and you guessed it, the whole story completely changes because of this. If Yacker didn't pop out of existence right before this scene, he would have helped save Sonic and Tails, or he would help defeat Robotnik, and once again, the entire story ends there. After using the mind control ray on Tails, Robotnik doesn't mass produce more to use on them later in the story, despite it being the most effective weapon against them and the entire focus of his plan. He doesn't even leave the original mind control ray attached to his Eggmobile to be used in the final boss battle against Sonic, where every second counts. All he needed to do was reincorporate it in the final battle, and he'd have a great chance at halting Sonic's movements on the spot and causing him to get swallowed by the black hole. So this massive oversight snaps the story in half rather effectively on its own, but we're still not done with gigantic plot holes the size of lunar craters. The bucket of sushi actually makes me want to commit regicide. Tails choosing to eat at Bucket of Sushi is insanely moronic, especially in light of the PA announcements concerning the food. He chooses to abandon Yacker in the middle of enemy territory for sushi made by his enemy, which directly results in Yacker's abduction. Why? The Bucket of Sushi Badniks treat Tails as a normal customer instead of treating him like the enemy he is. He should have been poisoned, killed, kidnapped, or something. Sonic should have been occupied with finding him and getting an antidote or taking care of him, which would completely derail the entire story. Tails is firmly portrayed as useless and weak in every single scene he's in. It makes no sense for him to be able to get there without issue. If this was the Tails from previous games, then it wouldn't be a problem. But since this is Colors Tails, it's flat out impossible, which is frustrating to the highest degree because no matter how you slice this, it cannot work. Sonic not being the one to get sushi despite him openly admitting he really wants some, and with Color Sonic being portrayed as a time-wasting, self-obsessed, insufferable cringe lord is beyond inconsistent. If either of the protagonists would have gone to the bucket of sushi, it would have been Sonic. And if Sonic did that, then he would have gotten sick, and that would significantly handicap his abilities and slow him way down. Robotnik would continue his evil plan, and the mind control cannon would still blow up. However, Robotnik would be able to escape and try again, while Sonic and Tails would struggle to get away in time. But because they would be a planet away from the space elevator and they don't have their own spacecraft, they would most likely die. The wisps that were still captured would most likely die, while the rest of the wisps futilely try to defuse the black hole, fail, and then everyone else would die. That's based off the assumption that all the wisps are required to defuse the black hole, considering the normal wisps restore the nega wisps before they all defuse the black hole. Also, Yacker and the wisps that rescued Sonic had to go back to space before the black hole was diffused. Basically what I'm trying to get at is, we don't know if the wisps are so OP that they can defuse a black hole with far less of them than we see in the story. We don't know if the nega wisps could help defuse the black hole. We don't know any limits of the wisps' powers, so I'm just assuming there's a limit here. That's me trying to fix just a little bit of this flaming pile of trash, in case you didn't catch that. If Tails didn't abandon Yacker to get sushi, then Yacker wouldn't have disappeared in the middle of the story, and that would significantly change the story in multiple ways. He would explain the nega wisps, he would help free his people, he would have explained what the nega wisp energy was powering. It would all change, maybe, considering Yacker's bizarre characterization, but we'll get to that. The bucket of sushi as a concept doesn't work at all, and it shouldn't even exist, and the person who thought of it should be fired immediately. The nega wisp harvest destroys the finale, the stakes, Yacker's characterization, and logic itself. Nega wisps existing in the first place is narrative shattering, but Yacker failing to provide an explanation of them before this scene is hilariously self-sabotaging. The fact that nega wisps appear to be even more powerful than regular wisps, despite nega wisps existing as a result of normal wisps drained of their energy. But somehow they have even greater powers and energy after being completely drained of energy. It lacks any sense of logic. Sonic opting to leave the nega wisps to suffer in lieu of taunting an edgelord blimp for several long moments. Tails opting to just stare at the nega wisps suffering despite him having the technical skills, time, and opportunity to free them. Even after mentioning that Yacker has disappeared, meaning he could be one of the nega wisps being siphoned. But Sonic runs off to find the generator, which is much less important than rescuing innocent creatures from torture. If Tails frees the nega wisps from this giant containment unit, the mind control cannon loses all of its energy, ergo no black hole, ergo Robotnik is free to either run away or try something else. Thus, the story would change quite a bit. The nega wisp energy being the only thing that powers the mind control cannon, despite Robotnik exclusively capturing non-corrupted wisps, Sonic and Tails refusing to revisit the nega wisp containment unit after freeing the planet, and instead pat themselves on the back for a marvelous job done. If nega wisps weren't a thing, and wisps instead died when they got their energy drained, then there wouldn't be enough to put their planets back, and potentially not enough to dissipate the black hole, which means everything in the solar system would be destroyed.
Unfortunately, our whole solar system would be doomed. The careful balance of the sun and our many planets would collapse, which could send them crashing into one another. All of the matter in our solar system would join the accretion disk around the black hole. As matter gets sucked into the black hole, it generates massive amounts of radiation, so even if we somehow survived all the asteroids, we'd likely die from the radiation.
Also, Sonic and Tails would be responsible for the deaths of thousands upon thousands of innocent creatures, assassinating their characters totally and completely. If Sonic and or Tails rescued the nega wisps before or after locating the generator, then the nega wisps would go after Robotnik immediately to beat him up, which breaks the entire finale. And now that we're on that subject, the finale of this game is a cavalcade of contradictions, logic decimation, and and story-breaking nonsense. Nega wisp juice creates a black hole when it explodes, for no reason. Black holes don't work like they're supposed to, space doesn't work like it's supposed to, the laws of physics and astrophysics are crucified mercilessly.
A black hole the size of a 1mm pin could destroy us if it was close enough to Earth due to its incredibly dense mass and extreme gravitational pull. Our survival all depends on whether we've surpassed the event horizon or not. Anything beyond this point would have to travel faster than light to escape. Yeah, good luck with that.
How soon you would die depends on the mass of the black hole. A smaller black hole would kill you before you even entered its event horizon, while you probably could travel inside a supermassive black hole for quite a while. As a rule of thumb, the further away from the singularity you are, the longer you live.
The tractor beam chains were dissipated after their corresponding generator was destroyed, but magically the chains are reattached and then they fade away all at once. Because that makes total sense. Robotnik fails to incorporate the mind control ray into the final boss mech despite it already being on his eggmobile. The space elevator still works despite the mind control cannon directly connected to it, as well as Tropical Resort, are being consumed by a black hole after its inner workings exploded repeatedly. I can't... Sonic tosses Tails into the space elevator without even considering that it doesn't work and dooming Tails to die a horrific death. Robotnik just waits patiently for Sonic and Tails to arrive, then for Sonic and Tails to have a conversation, and for Sonic to safely put Tails in the space elevator and launch it back to Mobius/Earth before fighting Sonic. Wisps are within suction distance from the final boss battle instead of them being entirely focused on stopping the black hole. Also, if he took this suction ability and built a badnik or two with it, then he could have used them to hunt down all the wisps, thus there would be no wisps being chased in the first scene of the game, and that would completely change the story. But no, despite how insanely effective this is, he sent Orbot and Cubot to gather the remaining wisps with nothing but a pea shooter and a butterfly net. No. I'm still not over that, because it actually incinerates the core of his character in ways that I would explain, but that's for another section of this series. Robotnik is launched into space, but somehow teleports back onto the space elevator track to then be sucked into a black hole. Huh? Orbot and Cubot are there too for some reason, despite them being absent from the scene before the boss fight and the boss fight itself. This is so they can be present for the extremely vital and necessary after credits scene that knocks this whole story down to the hellish depths it currently sits. Sonic wastes time breaking the fourth wall instead of running away from a black hole. Sonic has the ability to waste time breaking the fourth wall in front of a black hole. Sonic outruns a black hole for an extended period of time. The space elevator track is sturdy enough to still be a viable foothold for Sonic to run on despite being eviscerated by a black hole. No debris hits Sonic despite the speed in which the black hole would pull everything into it, including light itself. Sonic is finally swallowed up by the black hole, but the wisps are somehow immune to a black hole's effects and can also protect Sonic from the black hole's effects. What? Sonic, after being sucked into a black hole, isn't ripped apart atom by atom, nor is he incinerated by the immense heat of a black hole, nor is he significantly damaged by being sucked into a black hole somehow.
Right now, we don't know what happens next, but we think it could be one of two things. One, you die a quick death. A black hole curves space so much that once you cross the event horizon, there is only one possible direction. You can take this literally. Inside the event horizon, you can only go in one direction. The mass of a black hole is so concentrated, at some point even tiny distances of a few centimeters would mean that gravity acts with millions of times more force on different parts of your body. Your cells get torn apart as your body stretches more and more until you're a hot stream of plasma, one atom wide.
But if you happen to fall in a black hole, which is my preferred form of death, it's better than getting hit by a bus, right? So if you fall in a feet-first dive, those tidal forces will increase to the point where your body will just snap in two, likely at the base of the spine. Then each of those two pieces will snap into two. So you become 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 until you bifurcate all the way down to the center of the black hole. And you become a stream of atoms. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is you are funneled extruded through the fabric of space-time so that you used to be this wide, now you're this narrow. This phenomenon, this extrusion like toothpaste through a tube, we have a word for it. Death by black hole is called spaghettification.
For an average-sized stellar black hole, spaghettification can occur several hundred kilometers away from the event horizon. Anything entering a black hole would be ripped into a string of individual atoms. This would happen to anything that crosses it. People, planets, stars, you name it.
Ain't no way. Ain't no fucking way.
The wisps can undo a black hole with zero negative repercussions to them or their surroundings somehow. The wisps can teleport their planets across space with zero negative repercussions to them or their planets or their surroundings. Somehow, while in the teleportation process, the wisps move faster than Sonic ever did in this game, making capturing them an impossibility of the highest order, especially for the Wonder Twits, meaning the entirety of this story shouldn't have happened because the wisps are powerful enough to defend themselves from Robotnik's laughably weak army of robots. Just... why? Yet they can be contained by a couple of egg pawns and hilariously Orbot and Qbot, the most incompetent and weak robots Robotnik has ever created. Even Omochao is stronger than them because Omochao can be shot out of a specialized gun. Orbot and Qbot are the absolute worst choice for capturing the OP wisps, but they managed to have them running in terror. How? I wish there was some way to make that make sense, but it's just not possible. That is a pile of unrepentant, grotesque shit all by itself. Robotnik survives being sucked into a black hole and floating through space with a cracked and busted to shit Eggmobile. Orbot and Qbot survive being sucked into a black hole and continue to function despite the harsh conditions of the vacuum of space. They drift through an unknown part of space with no clear plan of getting to safety. They don't consider oxygen, water, food, temperature, and other basic human needs for Robotnik to survive a long drift through space. They don't have any planets nearby to even consider reaching before Robotnik dies. They don't think about checking a planet's atmosphere, temperature, and living conditions being suitable for a human. They don't move nearly as fast as they can move, despite space being much easier to travel through for them. You know, as opposed to a place with gravity, wind resistance, and etc. They don't consider sending out a distress signal to look for help from anyone to rescue Robotnik. They don't do anything except make him crave death. Why would you make them like this unless you legitimately want to be driven to suicide? I don't understand. If black holes function even remotely like they're supposed to, Sonic dies, Robotnik dies, the Wisps all die, their planets, and Earth/Mobius gets violently ripped apart. Then everything else in the solar system dies. If the Wisp planets functioned as planets are supposed to in close proximity to each other, everyone dies. If anything adheres to the laws of astrophysics even slightly, the entire story collapses in on itself because everyone and everything would die.
If Earth managed to fall into the orbit of the black hole, we'd experience tidal heating. The strong, uneven gravitational pull on Earth would continuously deform the planet. This would generate a tremendous amount of internal friction, heating the Earth's core to disastrous levels. It would likely give rise to earthquakes, volcanoes, and deadly tsunamis.
Not one part of any of the finale works even slightly. It's all contradictive, narrative-breaking nonsense pieced together with noodles of contrivance because logical progression isn't even in the same universe as this story. The entire plot is in tatters at the goddamn premise. The inception of this story, the very base fundamental parts of it, are like hobo rags. Hobo rags fed through a wood chipper, then a lit match dropped onto the pile. And every scene is a heaping splash of gasoline, making it burn faster and bigger until it's so overwhelming the damn wood chipper is caught in the flames. And that's putting it lightly. But the rancid plague of plot doesn't just stop at the script. The game itself adds openly contradictory information that snaps the tattered remains of the narrative in half yet again. Again.
No aliens were harmed in the creation of this park. They were all harmed after the park was created.
Then why did they allow any of this to happen? How was Robotnik able to do anything to them with his laughably weak robots? Why didn't they just pick him up and drop him out of orbit like they did for Sonic, then teleport their planets out of his reach when he tried to make trouble? And even if somehow, some freaking how, he managed to start construction on a wisp planet, once the wisps got wise to what he was doing, couldn't they have teleported the other planets away? Or teleport the construction away? Or teleport the badniks away? Or teleport Robotnik himself into the vacuum of space? Why was Sonic necessary to save them? What even is this?
Would Sonic the Hedgehog please report to the security office? Sonic the Hedgehog, please report to the security office.
So you have a security office, which is used exclusively as a hub for security systems, such as cameras, alarms, sensors, and etc. Where are the cameras, alarms, and sensors then? Why would you have a security office if you don't have a security system? What's the point of the security office? What purpose does it serve? And if you do have cameras, why haven't you used them at any point in this story to intercept, plan for, or at least track Sonic and Tails? Why are there no security systems in place to keep the transport between planets restricted whenever you choose? Why isn't this same system in place for the space elevator? Why doesn't the space elevator come with systems that tells you when it's in use? Why does it require physical keys instead of a code or a biometric scan to ensure that no one uses it until you're ready? Why aren't digital locks on reinforced doors used to secure captured wisps? Why are they out in the open without any surveillance of any kind? Where are the sensors that can detect where Sonic is at all times? Why aren't they used for some death traps in an attempt to stop Sonic? Where are the scanners that would be used to secure important places from Sonic and Tails? Where are the scanners that would be used to find errors or issues that come up anywhere on the interplanetary structure? Why are there no alarms tripped when Sonic approaches wisp containers? Why are there no alarms surrounding the generators? Why are there no alarms on the space elevator or the transport? Why are there no alarms anywhere on this damn thing when they would easily draw attention to wherever Sonic and Tails are and what specifically they're doing at any given time? Why does everything important function without passwords or passcodes or key cards? Why is there no clearance levels at least? Some places that need key cards, some that require a passcode and a key card, some that require an audible password, a passcode, and a key card. Some places that are the most secret and important require a biometric scan on top of all of that. Why aren't systems like that in place? Why aren't there vaults or reinforced structures housing important elements to your plan? Why is everything out in the open and accessible to anyone? Why aren't these guarded by some of the strongest badniks and deadliest of traps? Why isn't there any explanation given as to why Robotnik, the 300 IQ scientific genius who has had all of these security measures in place before this game, decided not to have them in this game? But here's the contradiction. There is absolutely a security office where these things would obviously be. So then why aren't they used for anything meaningful, such as defeating Sonic, securing wisp containers, keeping the mind control cannon safe, etc.? Why even make this joke?
We seem to be losing pressure on level 17.
So you have systems in place that warn you when something isn't working as it should. Then why didn't you install that on your ultra super hyper important mind control cannon? And why wouldn't you make any of this before installing these troubleshoot systems on every part of every level of every section of this entire thing? Why is any of this a thing? Why wouldn't you just leave this joke out? These mind-numbing, narrative-shattering, godforsaken contradictions decimate the already smoldering crater of the plot, all for the sake of some quick and easy jokes. It's honestly very impressive. I've never seen a couple of little throwaway lines utterly plummet an entire story to the depths of hell. This is a first for me. I wasn't expecting that.